which was pittance compared to the value of the tick that was being carried out. But they never, so this was going on. Afterwards, so Dang had a special arrangement. Otherwise, it was all managed by the local kings under the influence of the British residents who were guiding them under for the forest management practices. What happened after independence? All these forest tracts which were lying with the tribal kings, they were vested into forest department right away, straight away. Most of the lands became forest lands. It was declared as reserve forests and some protected forests, but largely reserve forests. No settlement processes were done. 5 minutes, okay. So forest rights, you can continue. So this happened, and they lost. So forest, they immediately lost. Whatever individual lands were there, immediately lost. They had no rights, no settlement process for them. Many areas, people were cultivating lands before this thing came, but they were also declared reserve forests, and people were declared as encroachers of the land. What has happened thereafter is that people lost land in development projects. So large lands, most of the villages, in forested area, most of the villages, individual land ownership is very little. 8 to 10% of the land would be covered under individual agricultural ownership. Rest all is forest lands owned by forest department. So people with increasing population, and with there is no other means of avenue, and they had no rights over forest produce. Forest deforestation that happened in Gujarat afterwards, deforestation that happened in Gujarat was largely by at the edges of forest department in the name of scientific forestry management. What happened? That all these forests were there. Britishers were taking only the mature ticks for their shipbuilding. Gujarat Forest Department and Indian Forest Department, Foreign Service, they said that forests must serve the industrial needs, wood requirement of the industry. So what they did during 60s and 80s was that they came out with this idea of plantation circles, where the most productive mixed forests were clearly felled, risen to the ground, all across, all the trees were cut. It is not just mature ticks or mature trees. All trees were removed, even the roots were extracted. And the idea was that once this area is cleared, all of this unnecessary vegetation, they would raise fast-growing teak plantations on this area. So that was the plan. So that the biggest deforestation that happened in Gujarat happened not because of illegal felling, happened not because of the population growth, not because of the non-interest of the tribals, or unscientific attitudes of the tribals, but happened because the forests were owned by forest department, and they documented this on large scale. That had happened in those areas. So people had no rights over the forests. They had very little control over the land. They were cultivating forest lands to meet the meager existence, but they were treated as encroachers, so always under the threat of being removed. Forest department would always pounce upon them. And this is the situation where the environment was also at a loss, and tribals also did not have much to bank upon. In this context, the Forest Rights Act came. People fought for them. We were part of that campaign. And forest rights gives basically rights over the lands which they are cultivating. Ownership rights, not ownership rights, but right to cultivate, and inherited rights continuously. They cannot sell this land, but they would be allowed to cultivate this land all across. And it also gives rights to forest produce, including bamboo. So they have 100% ownership of bamboo and all other minor forest produces. And they also have the right to manage forests as community forest resources. So we have been part of the groups that are active for the proper implementation of this act. We are very actively involved in the struggle about this. State government although very friendly, capital friendly, is not at all interested in implementation of this act. And so we have been fighting an uphill battle against for the proper implementation. About 182,000 claims were filed. Of these, only 20,000 were approved and rest all were rejected. And state government had claimed that all these are bogus claims. And we filed a PIL in the Gujarat High Court. We got a judgment in May 2030, which has said that all these claims, rejected claims, are to be reviewed again. And all the evidences which the government did not consider must be taken into account. So these things are going on. And one thing...
What is the name of the case?
PIL, action, youth fine. I would give you PIL number and everything I would give you. So judgment is also, 80-page judgment is there. It's a good judgment. One thing I would like to point out, that this enthusiasm, now the people have, when the FRA came, that because all these years, people also behaved not very constructively towards the environment, because they did not own anything. They had no right over access to that. So their attitude towards forest was also very, very not in the interest of the environment, that we can say. Once the rights came, once the FRA came, when the FRA came and people felt that they would be owners of bamboo and they would be owners of the field which they own, they immediately started not only improving their land, building farm barns and other things of which the land that they owned, but also protecting and regenerating the forests. In many areas, they on their own formed forest protection committees and forest regeneration committees. They took steps on their own without plantation, without going for any expansion things. They were taking up these steps. Then the government rejected all these claims. So there was a sort of a down. Okay, if government is not giving our land, how can we think that it would give us forests? So there is no point preserving it and spending a lot of time doing this. But let us do, so they reverted back. Now after the High Court judgment, again, there is some hope that these rights would be recognized. So people are now very, very enthused about protecting, not only protecting the forests and improving their soils. Many individual farmers are also now, because on their land, bamboo grown and on their own lands, which are privately being cultivated. Initially, before this, it belonged to forest department, so they had no incentive to grow bamboo. Now, because they own this land and all the produce of this land, they are thinking in a big way of going for bamboo cultivation, teak cultivation, and other forest reproduction. So overall, the whole scenario of that area can change in next 5 to 10 months, provided these things go ahead. Right now, it's still a struggle because we don't know. We are hopeful that we would get something, but we don't know how far it would go. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta. I must say that we rarely hear any positive stories about the protection of the rights of tribals and marginalized communities. So I think, do you want to say something? Okay. So I think that is a very encouraging thing that you've told us, and hopefully that will continue. So then I'll ask Mr. Mitra to continue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Namita, and thanks to the organizers for calling us here. I'm from the ivory tower, and complete contrast to Ambrish, because he spent his whole life working in the tribal districts of Gujarat, and I have spent last 20 years in Delhi. But what interested me in this whole exercise were two kinds, and which is what I'm going to share, because he didn't say much about his singular achievement in implementing FRA in Gujarat at least, and now we are trying to replicate the same in other states, at least trying to introduce the same ideas. And I think the issue for me was that India had a constitutional right to property as a fundamental right at the start in 1950. We went on diluting it right from the start with the First Amendment to the Constitution in 1951, which was the ninth schedule, to 1978 when it was deleted. The right to property was deleted from fundamental right, 19(1)(f). From that day to today, what we have witnessed is a counter-revolution of some kind. That is the protest against the dams, the protest against the SEZs, the Singur Nandigram episodes. What they actually was highlighting was the dilution of the right to property greatly expanded the abuse of eminent domain. And a critical mass was forming of people from the grassroots who no longer were willing to accept the acquisition by the state for whatever purpose. The Forest Rights Act, in my view, which came after Ambrish and others were on the campaign for at least 5-7 years, since 2000, I know, as a part of that campaign, when, to my view, the first legislation since 1978, which is seeking to recognize right to property and land. To me, it's a historic legislation of that kind, and which is why I got interested, because even as a student, I was very much interested in the constitutionality of right to property and the relationship between liberty and democracy. But I didn't think that the reversal would start in such a dramatic manner. So the significance of the Forest Rights Act are kind of, that is, this act empowers the Gram Sabha, not the Panchayat. Because the Panchayat is a larger body, the Gram Sabha is the more smaller unit directly affected in a particular area. And the Gram Sabha is empowered to do things which they can actually do. That is, this is not an act that subsidizes the Gram Sabhas or the villages with anything from somewhere else. This is an act which the Gram Sabhas themselves can try and implement. And to me, this whole process is a significant illustration of how democracy is deepening in this country to the remotest corners. And this is where my first thing would be, since Ambrish didn't mention it, the basic features of the Forest Rights Act. But in order to enable the Gram Sabha to actually try and have this law implemented, what Ambrish and Archpaini did was to figure out a very transparent, participative way by which people themselves could get their claims. Because there is a particular clause or a feature of the Act, which is the rights, both individual and community, would be recognized as of December 2005. That is, you would have to be able to show that you were cultivating the piece of land as of December 2005. Now, since these are mostly forest areas and since there had been no land settlement, how would one prove that they were actually cultivating? That's where the modern technologies came to the aid of some of the poorest Indians. Google Earth, I'm sure most of you are aware, had become available, but what the additional aspect that came to Google Earth around that time, or 2008-9, was the archival maps. So for the first time, we could see the maps or the satellite images of the area as of, say, 2003 or 2004 or 2006, around the 2005 cutoff that we were looking for, and the law requires. And that's when Ambrish figured that we could use simple GPS instruments. Most of you with smartphones have GPS. I had a smartphone. I didn't even know for 6 years that my phone had a GPS. So we were that ignorant. But you could use a simple GPS, plot each boundary. I'll do it. Plot each boundary, get it endorsed and approved by the Gram Sabhas. This is the status as of May 2013. As Ambrish said, the story is not just with Gujarat that they rejected 130,000. The story has been pretty much the same in much of India. In fact, 10, 11% is the rate of approval that we have witnessed. And this was my first interaction, I think, in 2009 and 10 when I went to one of the villages in Gujarat with Ambrish and Arch Vahine. And I was amazed that people could read, not read in the literal sense of reading a book, but could read a satellite image of their area and so quickly identify the plots themselves. They know their area as the back of your palm. They had never flown above. They had no idea what a satellite image was. But once they saw it and oriented it, the north, south, etc., they could identify plot by plot. Secondly, because at least quite a few of them were used to mobile phones, the GPS instrument didn't come as something foreign to them. That they could handle a GPS just like they handle a mobile phone. Together with these, Ambrish had this revolution, in my view, an unbelievable revolution, because what has happened in the last 3-4 years is more than 200 villages, 50,000 plots have been documented on the web platform that we have built, but that it was not done by him or his friends themselves. That in every village, it was the forest rights committees, which were formed under the Forest Rights Act by the Gram Sabha, that took the initiative. Ambrish and us, we helped in acquiring the GPS, trained these villages, and they went out to the field, made documentation of the plots, wrote down the names of the claimants, and have it approved by the Gram Sabha. The whole attempt was that it doesn't matter what the state might say or do. If people can do it, we should try and enable them to do it. So this is how, if you come to our website, righttoproperty.org, you'll find we plotted it. This is a Google map where you can select the villages. Since I'm not online, I'm just showing it on the slides. This is how you see the summary with the names of the claimants, the husband and wife, the area and the location, etc. We kind of generate reports of this kind for each individual plots, which can be given to the claimants and to the Gram Sabha for processing. Kind of report that is generated for the Gram Sabha to be submitted to they have to submit it to the sub-district level committee under the FRA, and then it can go on appeal to the district level committee for the final approval and disposal. 50,000 plots, I can't believe it. I really can't believe it, having seen it almost from the start, that so much has been possible in such a small time. And what is amazing is that while their initial activities were restricted to 1 or 2 districts in the Narmada area, they are now getting invitations from almost 5 or 10 districts of Gujarat, where the tribal populations are significant, where people have heard just by word of mouth. This exercise is taking place completely driven by demand. We are not a grant-giving organization, we have no money. The whole exercise has been taken up by the people themselves, bearing the cost of printing the kind of maps that you see. Because they understand the value of the property that they are seeking, both as individual titles as well as communal titles. These were the kind of workshops far from the IIC venues that we have been organizing for the last 1.5 years, trying to get, and the impact. Just last Sunday, I had a glimpse of something that I had thought of in theory, but I had no idea that I'm going to hear it from the people themselves. Last Sunday, Ambrish and I and some other friends, we were in a village in Gujarat in the Dediapada taluk of Narmada district, Sagai. There were 200 people, mostly people who have been actively involved with the FRC, who were there. Apart from what Ambrish said, that they are interested in investing further in irrigation, in bunding the areas, in protecting the forest. To me, what brought tears to my eyes were one guy stood up and said that now when he visits a taluk office or a district office, he is treated with respect, and added that at times he's even offered a glass of water. That is the other India that we have to be really aware of, that these were people who were treated worse than animals. This is an empowerment tool in addition to the title. The title will take time to come and in many cases, in fact, we saw improvement when Ambrish and all started with this whole exercise. Gujarat had a 11% approval rate in Narmada, and the district officials were happy that that was the highest in Gujarat. Today, it is 40 to 50% because of the technology that has been brought in. Because this is, and we saw it just a few months ago. A collector from Madhya Pradesh invited us, and once we demonstrated the capacity that the satellite images can do, the collector, the administrative side, as well as the forest department, who were all present there, agreed that this could be a very powerful way to resolve the kind of perpetual conflict that the forest department and the local communities have had for the last 60 years. Because the evidence is so categorical, particularly for agricultural land. And if we were online, we could have shown it to you. And this is the scope. You do? Yeah, but okay, if you can do it, so this is what I've already told you about, and this is kind of my theory why I got interested. In 25 years of being engaged in public policy issues and debates of various kind, this is the second time I'm witnessing or have the privilege of being part of an exercise where we are not dependent on anybody to exercise our rights. Right to information comes closest to it in the sense that you have the law, you can try and implement it, all of us can. Exactly in this case. That village after village are coming forward. Now we have had requests from people whom we had no idea, or they had no idea of us, we had no idea of them in the last few years. I mean, particularly in the last 1 year, from Odisha to Gujarat. That why not try and adopt it to see in their areas that how it can happen. And to me, this aspect or this relationship is critical, it's fundamental. That it is demand driven precisely because people at that level might be illiterate, might be poor, but they have a complete understanding, much more than any one of us, as to what is the real value of the property that they possess. Because most of us in this room don't depend on land as for our livelihood. We have no idea how people at that level need and value and cherish the land for agriculture and the common areas that will go around it. And to me, there has been no other example of a grassroots initiative to implement a right rather than waiting for the state to come forward and implement it, because the state has no capacity. We are talking of 25 to 40 million pieces of plots. There's no state in India which can map that scale. And this has been, to me, throughout history. Citizenship came up through ownership of property. And some of the poorest citizens of India in remotest corners are for the first time in their lives are beginning to feel as citizens of this country. And this has been part of the same, it's taken us 60 years, but some other countries took 200 years. So perhaps we have something to be proud of. And there's a whole lot of land-related laws that are now on the anvil. But let me just end with something that I think we should aim for and which would come. Because I heard in the morning that the Meghalaya has the right to the minerals under the ground. The Forest Rights Act does not give that. Fifth schedule probably gives right to the minor minerals in the tribal areas. But what the first stage is, like the conversion of the forest villages into revenue villages, so that the regular services, water, education, irrigation, health can come more freely. Then the transfer, lease, sale to capitalize. I cannot believe that 40 million tribals who can now claim ownership potentially would demand to accept a claim at a title which cannot have any capitalization value because it cannot be put on the mortgage market. The capitalization value is what made most of us leave what our ancestors did once upon a time, that is agriculture. So the capitalization is critical for real valuation of the asset that they are getting. And right to minerals underground, under whatever is under the soil. Right to manage the forest the community forest is already there, but it could also be extended to wildlife. It's only our lack of imagination, because there are plenty of examples around the world where the forest and the wildlife are managed by the communities themselves and share the benefit that comes from a high-value asset such as wildlife. So the whole, the future possibilities based on this act is enormous, because it's sensitizing and mobilizing a population that had hardly any voice. And finally, the recent 2 judgments, the Supreme Court on the Vedanta, underscored FRA, the Forest Rights Act. The Forest Rights Act goes community by community, and I think the kind of balance that Mr. Verghese was mentioning in the morning is probably possible if not community as a collective, but community who's actually a community in a particular area are recognized as having the capacity to decide whether to accept a particular mining project or any project for that matter or not. If they do, it's their right. If they don't, it's their right. And that is a transformation that I think that got crystallized in the Singur episode. That what was being claimed was not a compensation. What was being claimed was whether owners really have the right over their property. And the question now is, can the FRA potentially be extended and expanded, not just to empower the communities, not just on the land, but anything that is underneath, or anything, or the timber and the bamboo that grows over it. Because Ambrish and all, 20 years ago, I think, his colleague Trupti had this campaign on bamboo, which the forest department was selling at 1 rupee per bamboo to a paper mill. Today, the villagers can sell it at 80 rupees. It's a transformation. And displacement has become a thing of the past in most part of tribal Gujarat. Because this guy who told me that he's offered a glass of water also said that today, for the forest department to really come in to remove people because they are encroachers is socially and politically almost impossible. Change is taking place. The question is whether we will recognize what is changing and therefore be able to leverage it for the better or not. Thank you very much for the time. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mitra, for telling us about all this work that is happening actually at the grassroots, which is very important to bring out. So I'll now turn over to Kanchi and to Bharat.
Okay, from the process of creation of property, I think we are heading to a place where people are engaged with processes of continuing access, negotiating the settled with the transient, where the commons and the individual are kind of blending together, and all in the context of the large external threat of land grab in an area. Much as the ethos of Mundra goes, I'd start this presentation with Bharat Bhai, who's here, acknowledging that a lot of that has emerged in Mundra is a very interesting combination. A lot of the thinking that is of what we will be actually presenting today is a combination of common thinking with individual contribution. So we have Manju here, who's pretty much engaged in the processes and discussions in Mundra right now. Namita, who's been part of that initial draft public hearing counter contribution, which was very critical for one of the cases that was fought in the National Green Tribunal. Shibani, who probably drafted that petition, the first draft of that petition. So the reason I'm saying this is a lot of what is happening in Mundra, where people are coming in with their own individual thinking, skills, is that common ethos, and that is what is critical to this place. So you have the right to stop me at any point of time and say, well, our individual contribution is different. Okay, thanks for that shortcut. I was going to be doing. So I'll just quickly take about 5-7 minutes and go through an overview of what is been taking place in Mundra for the last 10-15 years, maybe about 2 decades, and then hand over to Bharat Bhai, who will be speaking about the actual on-ground work that he's been doing for almost like 2 decades now in the area, to 1.5 decades, and the live experiences which are missed out here. So we are talking about Kutch, the district of Kutch, and Mundra, a very interesting area there, which I learned after going there, that this is one of the areas in Kutch which has sweet water. So because of that, the kind of livelihoods and occupations that you find here are very unlike a desert area. So there is a huge amount of horticulture taking place. There is a lot of grazing. And of course, there are the artisanal fishing communities which Namita was mentioning during the introduction itself. A typical fishing harbor, I think we probably just draw the curtains a bit so that the pictures are visible, because the slides are more full of pictures, I think, than text. To just travel to the area and see what is the kind of land use we are talking about. Most of these fishing harbors are occupied, traditional fishing harbors and temporary fishing shelters, which fishing communities, artisanal fishing communities, including on-foot fishing communities, small boats and on-foot fishing communities occupy 7 to 8 months in a year, when their actual villages are a little more inland to the area. It's a very interesting mix of ecological and social networks and relationships that we're talking about here. It's predominant. It's like it's a bird haven. You have flamingos, you have painted stock. So it's like, and you have mud flats, mangroves, sand dunes, all the coastal ecological ecosystems that you're talking about, and very interesting social networks and social relationships and occupations that kind of blend into each other, and kind of have been existing in conflict and in negotiation for generations now. So fishing, as we spoke about, small fish boats. Bharat Bhai, stop me anytime, huh? Because a lot of what on fishing boats we've learnt about is from him as well, and his work with the fishing communities. It is the place where maximum production of Bombay duck fish and the fish that is drying is exported all across the world. We are talking about, other than fishing, a lot of different livelihoods there, which is salt production, camel grazing, other kinds of grazing, and, as I said, horticulture, which is more individually owned. So a lot of the other livelihood spaces are commons. In the last 15 years or so, there's been rapid land use transformation that has taken place in Mundra. There have been multiple projects with overlapping project areas. So what you're talking about is projects actually, industrial projects, infrastructure projects, ports, coal handling facilities, thermal power projects, which have started acquiring land maybe 10 years in advance and thinking of using it now. So one of the biggest proponents there is the Adani Group, which probably acquired land around 2003, 2004, and has started using it only